Okay, so starting off with life in Medina, we previously covered life in Mecca and we discussed the life of Holy Prophet and the early conversion to Islam, the preaching and everything. Now, after severe opposition, we are going to start off what were the events actually that led to the migration. Now, the Quraysh had persecuted Muslims since the call at Safa, and they used all possible means to stop Islam. In the seventh year, they boycotted Banu Hashim, and he lost his protection. Abu Talib, after the boycott, he went to Taif with hope for better response, but their reaction was also similar, और ताइफ के लोगों ने भी सही reaction नहीं दिया था. The people of Yasrib promised the Prophet protection and invited him to Yasrib. Allah commanded the Prophet to migrate. Yasrib क्या है? Medina. The Quraysh and their council decided to kill the Prophet and finish it all. उनको पता लग गया था ये migrate कर रहे हैं. However, Allah informed the Prophet beforehand that remember how the disbelievers plotted against you and to keep you in bonds or slay you or get you out. They plot and plan, and Allah too plans as well, but the best of the planners is Allah. The Prophet appointed Ali to stay to return the valuables kept with him, and Ali lay in the Prophet's bed, making it seem as if the Prophet is still there. The Quraysh had his house surrounded, and the Prophet came out and cast a dust in their eyes, reciting the verses of Quran. The Quraysh were unable to hear him or see him, and the Prophet escaped silently. और उन्होंने अपनी जगह हजरत अली को वहां पे लिटाया हुआ था. So the Prophet then securely left Makkah with Hazrat Abu Bakr. अब वो हजरत अबू बकर और प्रॉफिट चले गए केव ऑफ सौर में जहाँ पे एक और वाकया हुआ. अब कुरैश ने बाउंड्री लगा दी कि जो भी हजूर सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम को मारेगा उसको 100 कैमल्स मिलेंगे. All the main exits of Makkah were blocked, and the Prophet and Abu Bakr took refuge in the cave of Saur around 8 kilometers from Makkah. The Quraysh even reached the entrance of the cave, and they would find them even if they looked in their direction. अबू बकर परेशान हुए कि वो तो हमें ढूंढ लेंगे. But Allah says that the two were in the cave and he said to his companions, have no fear for Allah is actually with us. When the Quraysh came to the cave, उन्होंने देखा कि कुरैश ने देखा कि वो बिल्कुल केव के एंट्रेंस पे एक स्पाइडर का वेब है और वहां पे वाइल्ड पिजन्स बैठे हुए हैं और उन्होंने वहां पे अंडे भी दे दिए जो कि वहां बैठे हुए थे. अब इससे तो यही प्रूव होता है कि केव ऑफ सौर का एंट्रेंस तो तकरीबन ब्लॉक है और हो ही नहीं सकता कि अंदर कोई बंदा गया हो क्योंकि एक जाला बनने में इतना अरसा लगता है. तो how is it even actually possible that someone was actually inside that cave? तो कुरैश ने थोड़ा अपनी सर्च वगैरह बंद कर दी. उनको था कि इम्पॉसिबल है कि यहाँ पे कोई भी बंदा केव ऑफ सोर में होगा. So they found it impossible for anyone to have entered, so they did not check and returned. Now, when they reached Medina, Abu Bakr's son Abdullah and daughter Asma brought them food, a guide, and also 3 camels. The guide even took them from Tulay and busy paths, and before reaching Yasrib, they stopped at Quba. Hazrat Ali ने उनको वहाँ पे join किया, and there they set the foundations of the first mosque of Islam, और वहाँ से फिर वो यसरब के लिए निकल पड़े. The people of Yasrib greeted them joyfully, and men in armor raised their swords to even salute him. Women also sang songs to welcome him, and the city was renamed from Yasrib to Medina when the Prophet had migrated there. Everyone wanted the Prophet to stay with them, and whenever someone took hold of his camel, Prophet said, let her go, for she is under Allah's command. Kaswa, जो ये camel थी, stopped at the courtyard of two orphans, मतलब Sahil and Suhail. The Prophet bought the courtyard from them, and even though they offered it as a gift, the Prophet ने पूछा कि इसकी मुझे price बताओ, we'll pay for that. Meanwhile, the Prophet stayed at the house of Abu Ayyub Ansari as a guest, and in 7 months, Prophet's own house was completed, and it also served as a mosque and a community center. जब ये mosque बनी थी in Cuba. Makawat. Now the Prophet established brotherhood, जिसको immigrants and helpers वाला chapter भी कहते हैं. Who are the immigrants? Muhajirin. Helpers कौन है? Ansar. Prophet established brotherhood in Yasrib by pairing each of the Ansar with a Muhajir. और ये chapter है आपकी बुक में पूरा immigrants and helpers के नाम से. Hazrat Ali was left at the end, and so the Prophet took his hand and said, this is my brother, and the brotherhood created selflessness as well. The Ansar were very generous to their brothers, and they even shared their possessions and wealth. क्योंकि मुहाजिर तो हर चीज अपनी belonging, अपना घर, कारोबार, wealth सब कुछ छोड़ के मक्का से आ गए थे, and they even named them in inheritance as well. The Muhajirin treated the Ansar with gratitude in return as well, and they were actually thankful for the people of Medina who actually gave them shelter, their belongings, and even some names in the inheritance. Then came the Charter of Medina, where the people of Yasrib had 3 Jewish tribes. To maintain peace and form a good community, he signed a treaty with the Jews, and the terms of the treaty were complete religious freedom for all faiths, equal rights for both Jews and Muslims. Medina should be a city of peace for both Ansar and Muhajirin, and the both parties should enjoy the same security and freedom, Jewish and Muslims. And in case of an attack, Charter of Medina ने ये कहा था कि अगर मदीना पे अटैक होते हैं मुस्लिम्स मतलब कि अंसार महाजरीन और ज्यूइश ट्राइब्स दोनों प्रोटेक्ट करेंगे तो ज्यूइश और मुस्लिम के दरमियान एक ट्रीटी साइन हो गई थी जिसको हम चार्टर ऑफ मदीना भी कहते हैं विच वाज एक्चुअली अ पीस ट्रीटी. The Prophet would decide all disputes and his word would be final. Then took place the Battle of Badr, जो कि 624 AD में हुआ था, where the Makkans became more hostile towards Muslim after the migration to Medina. जो वहां पीछे मक्का में रह भी गए थे उनके ऊपर भी ऑपोजिशन बहुत ज्यादा थी that they almost died as well. Makkans ने क्या किया? They allied with Jews around the Medina to put an end to Islam, and they started to raid Muslim property in the outskirts of the Medina. Fruit trees were destroyed, flocks were stolen, and the Prophet decided to react by taking revenge on the Meccan trade caravans. Abu Sufyan was returning from Syria with a trade caravan and he was passed to from brother. अब उन्होंने बदर से गुजरना था. अबू सुफियान वरी हो गए थे कि मुस्लिम्स तो इस वक्त तपे हुए हैं उन्होंने हम पे अटैक कर देना क्योंकि वी हैव डिस्ट्रॉयड अ लॉट ऑफ देयर स्टफ एज वेल सो ही सेंट अ मैसेंजर टू द कुरैश asking for reinforcement to escort the caravan safely. The Quraysh sent an army of 1,000 men led by Abu Jahl and Abu Sufyan changed his route and got to a point of safety. He sent another messenger to the Quraysh and told them that they could return. However, Abu Jahl ने कहा था अब यहाँ तक आ गए तो अब लड़के जाएंगे and he was determined to fight as they had already come this far. When the Prophet found out, he told the Banu Hashim to prepare for the battle, whereas he gave Ansar the choice to choose, but they were all ready for the battle. 313 men were prepared, with only 2 horses and 70 camels set off from Badr, led by the Prophet. The Prophet kept praying to Allah for help, and the angels joined the ranks of Muslims, and the Makkans were defeated. Abu Jahl was beheaded by a poor young Muslim shepherd, and Hazrat Bilal also killed his old master Umayyah bin Khalf. 50 were killed, 50 were taken prisoners, and the 313 people of Badr actually won the war. And Muslims actually won their first battle. It actually added great strength to the Muslims as well, and large amounts of booty were collected. The prisoners were treated justly, and the rich were freed for heavy ransom, and the literate were even told to teach 10 Muslim children. या तो वो जिजिया ransom दे दे या फिर वो 10 मुसलमान बच्चों को पढ़ा दें to earn their freedom. Many prisoners accepted Islam because of their humane treatment too, and इसका reference आपको बहुत अच्छा याद होना चाहिए. This and that Allah is the weakener of the struggle of the unbeliever. जो unbeliever struggle करेंगे against Muslim, Allah उनको खुद ही automatically weak कर देता है so that they can lose. Then came the battle of Banu Kanika. The Prophet realized that the Jewish tribes inside Medina were now a danger to the Muslims और वो अपने अपने फोर्ट्स में जाके बैठे हैं उनके पास पैसा भी है पावर भी है वेल्थ भी है और वो कुछ भी कर सकते हैं and they even questioned the Prophet and his teachings as well. After the Battle of Badr, a fight broke out between a Muslim woman and a Jewish merchant. दो लोग इसमें मारे गए जब वो woman और Jewish merchant के दरमियान एक लड़ाई and an Ansar who came to the help to woman. Instead of going to the Prophet, क्योंकि रूल तो ये था चार्टर मदीना में ये था कि जो भी डिस्प्यूट या मसला होगा प्रॉफिट हल करेंगे. अब बजाय ये कि जो बहस हुई और फिर मार धाड़ और मर्डर में हो गया था, instead of going to the Prophet for arbitration, they requested reinforcement from their former allies against the Muslim. The reinforcement, however, did not come. तो Prophet ने कैनेका को ब्लॉक कर दिया with his forces and they held out for 2 weeks before surrendering. The prophets spared their lives, but their property was taken, and the Jews were now dismissed for Medina. तो हमने fort capture कर लिया था. It established the authority of Prophet in Medina now. Then came Battle of Uhud, where the Muslims and Makkans met again in 625, and the defeat at Badr greatly angered the Quraysh. इनको था कि अब बदला लेना है, and they began to prepare for the revenge. Well, the Prophet was informed by his uncle Abbas that 3,000 men will soon attack them, and the council of war was called, and Ibn Ubay wanted to defend Medina from inside. The rest of the force wanted to face them in open plains, and the Prophet solved the issue by leaving Ibn Ubay with 300 men and took his 700 men to Uhud. The Prophet strategically divided his army and 50 archers were placed at top of the Uhud. उनको ये कहा था कि यहाँ से कुछ भी हो जाए जीत जाए हार जाए हटना नहीं है. They were strictly instructed. जिन आर्चर्स को हमने खड़ा किया हुआ था वहां ओहद की पहाड़ पे उनको कहा था स्ट्रिक्टली इंस्ट्रक्ट किया था Prophet ने not to leave their post. The Makkans were led by Khalid bin Walid, a great warrior, and the Muslims had a good start and were able to break the front enemy lines. The archer came down to collect the spoils of the war क्योंकि उन्हें लगा कि मुसलमान जीत रहे हैं और मक्कन्स भाग रहे हैं तो वो नीचे बूटी कलेक्ट करने आ गए, जो जो माल है वो सब कुछ पड़ा हुआ था। खालिद बिन वलीद सॉ दिस, और उन्होंने ये अपॉर्चुनिटी देखी दोबारा अटैक करने की पीछे से, बिकॉज मुस्लिम्स वर अनप्रोटेक्टेड, क्योंकि सारे आर्चर्स पहाड़ से नीचे आ चुके थे। The Muslims began to panic, and many even rushed up the slopes of Uhud. The Prophet was also injured too amidst the chaos, and he even lost some teeth, and the horn of his helmet pierced his cheek as well. Around 20 Muslims formed a protective shield around the Prophet. Many were injured, जिसमें तलहा, जुबैर, कैलिब्स ऑफ इस्लाम और ये सब भी थे। और एकदम से एक रूमर स्प्रेड हुई कि प्रॉफिट हैज बिन किल्ड, क्योंकि उनकी एक शक्ल का आदमी भी मुसलमानों के अमंग था, जो थोड़ा बहुत प्रॉफिट की तरह दिखता था। मुस्लिम्स वर डीमोरलाइज्ड, उन्होंने एकदम से होप छोड़ दी कि हमारे प्रॉफिट की डेथ हो गई। मक्कन्स आल्सो ईज्ड, एंड 70 मुस्लिम्स वर मार्टर्ड एंड 40 मक्कन्स वर किल्ड। हजरत हमजा वाज आल्सो किल्ड बाय वैशी द स्लेव ऑफ इंडिया, क्योंकि उसने उमैया का बदला लेना था, जिसको हजरत बिलाल ने मारा था। हिंदा आल्सो च्यूड ऑन हिज लिवर, एंड यहाँ का रेफरेंस क्या है? दोज ऑफ यू हु टर्न बैक ऑन द डे द टू होस्ट, it was shaitan who caused them to fail because of the some evil that they had actually done। मतलब यहाँ से मुस्लिम को ग्रीड का ही पता लगेगा। जो आर्चर्स उस पोस्ट पे खड़े हुए थे, वो एकदम नीचे क्यों आ गए? इट वॉज ऑल अ ग्रीड। आफ्टर बैटल ऑफ ओहर टुक प्लेस बैटल ऑफ ट्रेंच। ये बैटल्स बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है, इसका क्वेश्चन तो आता है। The Battle of Khandak took place in 5 after Hijr, with Banu Nadir allied with the Quraysh to avenge their exile. Seeing their strength, other tribes like Banu Ghatfan, Asad, and Banu Sulaim joined them as well. और मुस्लिम फोर्स कम थी, which could not match the enemy numbers, क्योंकि enemies काफी ज्यादा allies बना चुके थे। Now the Prophet held a council of war, और यहाँ पे आपके पास इजमा की भी एक एग्जाम्पल आती है, याद रखना। इजमा क्या था? कंसेंसस लेने के लिए होली प्रॉफिट ने एक काउंसिल बिठा दिया, being informed of the trend. Salman Farsi gave the best suggestion of digging a trench around the city like the Persians do, and everyone agreed to the idea कि खंदक खोजी जाए। इसको गज़वा अज़ाब भी कहते हैं, ट्रेंच भी कहते हैं, गज़वा खंदक भी कहते हैं। Every man in Medina, including the Prophet himself, began to dig the trench. Seeing the Prophet dig too, the Muslims felt even more energized, और वो खुद भी ये हिम्मत नहीं हारे और उन्होंने पूरी खंदक खोली। The Quraysh and their allies were shocked to see the trench, and they even made a few attempts to get across, but no one could succeed. The Makkans eventually began to run out of an animal fodder, and 2 weeks into a siege, एक बहुत बड़ा तूफान आया, बारिश हुई, जिसने सारे टेंट्स को दोनों साइडों पे काफी ज्यादा डैमेज कर दिया था। The morale of the Makkans was low, and they lost the will to fight even after the storm. लेकिन Muslims won without even actual fighting. Then came a treaty of Hudaybiyah. In the 6th year of Hijrah, the Prophet saw himself performing Umrah in a dream, and he invited his companions to join him from Umrah after narrating his dream. 70 camels were brought to sacrifice, and the Prophet's wife Umm Salma also accompanied them. Prophet को यही ख्वाब आया था कि वो उम्रा कर रहे हैं, and that is why he invited his companions के हमें उम्रा करना चाहिए। The Quraysh ने अलाउ नहीं किया मुस्लिम्स को मक्का में एंटर होने के लिए, खाना काबा किधर है? मक्का में। Khalid bin Walid was sent with 200 troops to stop them, and the Prophet was also informed of this by his scout. He changed the route and arrived at Hudaybiyah to camp there. Hazrat Usman was sent to Makkah as a Muslim ambassador कि ये Muslims को वहां जाके represent करे और कोई solution निकाले इस बात का। He was well received in Makkah due to his relations, and however, a rumor was spread that he had been murdered as well. The Muslims made a pledge at the hand of Prophet called Baitul Rizwan। इसको बैतुल रिजवान क्यों कहते हैं? क्योंकि जिस दरख्त के नीचे ये बैत लिया गया तो उस दरख्त का नाम भी रिजवान था। They pledged to avenge the death of Hazrat Usman, क्योंकि सब मुस्लिम्स को लगा कि हजरत उस्मान का मर्डर हो चुके थे। Meccan envoy soon arrived and the treaty was formed. The Quraysh and Muslims signed the Treaty of Hudaybiyah with the terms that number one, there would be no war for 10 years. Number two, Muslims could not take Muslims from Mecca, and but the Quraysh could take the relatives from Muslims. Number three, whoever wanted to have a pact with either parties could do so. The Muslims would go back that year and come back the following year for performing Umrah and Hajj. और जो भी हाजी pilgrims होंगे, they were unhappy with the treaty, but again, on their way back, verses of Surah Fatiha was released, that verily we have given you a glorious victory, so that Allah may forgive your past faults and those to follow, fulfill His favor to you and guide you on a straight path. This is in reference for Treaty of Hudaybiyah. हाँ, उस दफा वो उम्रा नहीं कर सकते, but again, according to the treaty, they could come back on a following part of the year. Allah's pleasure was with the believers that they showed loyalty under the tree, and these verses made the Muslims rejoice. Moreover, during this life in Medina, Holy Prophet ने मजीद expansion का सोचा था, and he started sending these letters to different emperors of different empires. Now, the Prophet sent letters to different rulers around the world, and the Roman Emperor Heraclius, जिसको Hercules भी कहते हैं, was even impressed but did not accept Islam. फिर the king of Egypt, Makuka, also didn't accept, but he sent back a lot of gifts. Negus, Najashi, emperor of Abyssinia, accepted Islam. Mundir, the governor of Bahrain, accepted Islam. Fada, the governor of Yamama, did not accept Islam. फिर Haris, the king of Damascus, did not accept Islam. King of Oman, Jafar, and his brother accepted Islam. Persian Emperor जो Khosrow था reacted with anger, and even he tore up the letter, and the Prophet cursed his empire as well. Then took place the Khyber expedition, a very important event, expected 10 mark का question इस साल आ सकता. It took place in 628, and after the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, the Muslims could focus on Banu Nadir. The Jews had conspired against the Muslims from the forts of Khyber, and the Prophet marched towards Khyber with only those who had gone on the pilgrimage. The Jews were unable to unite against the Muslims, and the Muslims had to fight many small skirmishes for this reason as well. The Muslims attacked the fort nearest to them, and a spy was also captured who told the Muslims the weaknesses of these forts. अब ज्यूज के खिलाफ ये एक्सपीडिशन करना जरूरी था. द मुस्लिम्स वर एबल टू टेक द वीकर फोर्स, क्योंकि ज्यूज सारे फोर्ट्स में किलों में बैठे हुए थे अपने अपने. लेकिन जब वहां से एक स्पाई आया मुस्लिम्स की हेल्प करने, मुस्लिम्स ने कुछ वीक वाले जो फोर्ट्स और किले थे उनको कैप्चर कर लिया था. जैसे कि फोर्ट ऑफ कमूज जो था उसने सबसे ज्यादा ट्रबल दी मुस्लिम को, सबसे बड़ा फोर्ट और ताकतवर यही था. Prophet gave the standard to Hazrat Ali, and the battle to follow then was also in the favor of Hazrat Ali. The Jews, however, escaped from the back door of the fort and hid in other forts. The citadel of Zubair fell next, and followed by the strongest fort of Kamuz, and Hazrat Ali killed a very strong Jewish warrior Marhab in the combat on the first attack as well. ये सबसे बड़े कमूज फोर्ट का जो चीफ था, he even when he lost, कुछ लोग तो पीछे से भाग गए थे, but when Hazrat Ali captured it, he gave away all of his wealth and belongings for their lives as well. However, the chief and his cousins were later put to death for hiding the wealth, and after the fall of Kamuz, Khyber ka area came under Muslim control. The Jews were allowed to continue working in the lands in exchange for half of their earnings per year. इस Khyber expedition में 93 Jews were killed in the expedition, and 18 Muslims were martyred in the Hazrat Ali's battle. Now the Muslims were now safe from any threat from Banu Nadir, because this was one of the largest Jewish tribes that were actually a very, very big trouble for the Muslims. फिर हुआ Battle of Muta. In 629, the Prophet had sent missionaries to Bedouin tribes of Syria. Missionaries होते हैं जैसे ambassadors भेजना जो इस्लाम preach करेंगे. But again, they were treated with hostility, और बहुत से को तो सीरिया में मार दिया था. Prophet also sent an envoy to Sager, and this envoy was intercepted by the chief of Ghazan tribe and killed. This could not be ignored, and Prophet sent a force of 3,000 men against the chief of Ghazan tribe as well, which was led by Zaid bin Haris. The Prophet ने Zaid को instruct किया था, told them that if Zaid was to be martyred, Jafar ibn Abi Talib would be next in command, और अगर वो भी martyr हो गए, then Abdullah ibn Rawaha would be the next in command for the battle. And if all three were to fall, the Muslims were to choose amongst themselves through ijma. The Byzantines had expected them, and they met at Buta. Byzantines कहाँ पे होते हैं? सीरिया में, ठीक है. Buta with an army of 1 lakh. All three commanders were martyred in battle, and the command came to Khalid bin Walid. With his unique strategy, they were able to retreat with only 12 martyrs, while the Romans lost many more. After that, now let's talk about the conquest of Makkah. इसके ऊपर 10 mark question. Very important. ठीक है. In 630, the Quraysh violated the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, and men of an elite tribe of Quraysh, Banu Bakr, killed a man of Banu Khuza who was an ally of Muslim. Quraysh supplied Banu Bakr with weapons, and 2 of their men also took part in the fighting. अब Quraysh ने treaty sign की थी कि ठीक है लड़ तो नहीं सकते, लेकिन they started funding दूसरे कबीले को fund कर रहे थे against Muslim as well. Now the Prophet gave the Quraysh 3 options: to play blood money, break ties with Banu Bakr, or to dissolve the Treaty of Hudaybiyah. Quraysh ने third option choose किया, to dissolve the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, but Quraysh soon realized their mistake, and Abu Sufyan tried to negotiate and alter the treaty of, but his efforts were in vain. कुरैश को ये तो हमने गलती कर दी ट्रीटी ऑफ हुदैबिया को खत्म करके. क्यों? क्योंकि अब तो वॉर हो सकती है. ट्रीटी ऑफ हुदैबिया में क्या था कि कोई जंग नहीं होगी 10 सालों तक. कुरैश ने कहा ठीक है ट्रीटी ऑफ हुदैबिया खत्म कर देते. बाद में उनको अपनी गलती का अंदाजा हुआ, और ऐसा अंदाजा हुआ कि द प्रॉफिट गैदर्ड ऑल द allies of Muslim in the empire. They gathered their armies outside Medina as well, and the Prophet marched from Medina with an army of 10,000. They reached the outskirts of Makkah and camped outside the city. To show off the strength of the Muslim, They spread out and lit torches and campfire, making their army seem huge. Abu Sufyan went with two companions to the Prophet and accepted Islam there and then. The Prophet sent Abu Sufyan back to his house and declared that whoever took shelter in this house और द काबा, जो खाना काबा में शेल्टर ले ले कुरैश का बंदा, या जो अबू सुफियान के घर शेल्टर ले लेगा, वो महफूज रहेगा. The prophet split his army into four columns and entered Makkah from all sides. They were instructed to only fight in self-defense, and only Khalid bin Walid was met with some resistance. बाकी और किसी कुरैश ने किसी कॉलम को resist नहीं किया था. A dozen Makkans were killed. After the Muslims had fully poured into Makkah, Prophet made tawaf of the Kaaba and recited the verses of Quran. The truth has now come, and the falsehood has perished. For falsehood is bound to perish, and the prophet broke all 360 idols. जितने वो 360 बुत पड़े हुए थे खाना काब में, उन सारे बुतों को तोड़ दिया. And the prophet addressed the Makkans and forgave them despite all their cruelty. The prophet climbed the Mount of Safa, where he first preached publicly. क्योंकि जब उन्होंने पहली दफा preach किया था सफा पे, उनको इतनी ज्यादा opposition मिली थी. Now he actually preached this message publicly and was rejected and ridiculed. This time people in large numbers came and now accepted Islam, जब इस दफा उन्होंने सफा पे दोबारा अनाउंस किया था. बैटल ऑफ हुनैन क्या था? The Hawazin tribe from Taif was strictly opposed to Islam. अब विजिट टू ताइफ जब हुआ था प्रॉफिट का, उन्होंने भी काफी ज्यादा अनप्लीजिंग बिहेवियर शो किया था. They gathered their army after the conquest of Makkah and had 20,000 men at Valley of Hunain. Prophet 12,000 men के साथ गए थे, and the army of Wazin was led by Malik. Malik positioned the best of his archers at either side of Valley of Hunain. अब मुस्लिम्स को इस वैली से गुजरना था. As soon as the Muslims entered the valley, Hawazin ने उन पे अटैक कर दिया, and they were surrounded by men from all directions. बहुत से मुस्लिम गिर गए, शॉक में थे और कंफ्यूज होके वापस भागने लगे. But the Prophet stood his ground and rallied the troops around him. The disciplined section of the army began to counter-attack, and Hazrat Abbas reorganized the army as well. The Muslims were able to defeat the Hawazin after a close battle, and they retreated behind the walls of Taif. Muslims ने बहुत ज़्यादा बूटी कलेक्ट की थी, and Hawazin women and children who had been left behind were taken captives. और यहाँ पे एक रेफरेंस आता that on the day of Hunain, when you rejoice your numbers, but it availed you the not, and the earth vast it is, was straightened for you. चाहे जितनी मुश्किलात हो, earth was there, like zameen. And then you turn back in the flight, and then Allah sent His calmness on the messenger. यही calmness, यही trust, यही comfort messenger को पहुंचाया, that the messenger was able to hold his ground and set down forces which you sought not. Then came the siege of Taif. अब ताइफ से जो हवाजन ट्राइब की डिफीट तो हो चुकी थी हुनैन में. आफ्टर द बैटल ऑफ हुनैन, प्रॉफिट ने सीज कर दिया ताइफ पे, क्योंकि ताइफ के बहुत से वुमेन और चिल्ड्रन भी कैप्टिव्स ले लिए थे. Now Taif had enough provisions for a year, and after the month, the siege was not going anywhere, and the Prophet lifted it. The Muslims begged the Prophet to curse Taif, but instead he prayed for their guidance. When the spoils of the Battle of Hunain were distributed, Prophet released his share of Hawazin captains to return to their tribe. Most Muslims followed the example of the Prophet, and those who did not were offered 6 camels for each captive they freed. Malik and the people of Hawazin were greatly impressed by Prophet's treatment, क्योंकि उन्हें कहा था कि Prophet तो हमारे साथ बहुत अब सख्ती करेंगे for what we have done. Prophet was extremely calm. The chief of the tribe that defended Taif successfully now besieged it. Malik cut off the trade routes, and Taif realized that they had to make peace with the Prophet or they are going to face a lot of financial crisis. फिर रूमर स्प्रेड हो गए थे कि जो हेराक्लियस था बाइजेंटाइन का, ही वाज प्रिपेयरिंग अ कैंपेन अगेंस्ट मुस्लिम, क्योंकि इसने भी लेटर को फाड़ दिया था, एंड ही वाजंट इवन इंटरेस्टेड इन इस्लाम. प्रॉफिट की बात पता लग गई, एंड ही कॉल्ड टुगेदर ऑल द मुस्लिम्स एंड एलाइज टू काउंटर अटैक, और एक 30,000 की आर्मी असेंबल हो गई थी विद 10,000 हॉर्सेस. द हीट एंड ड्रॉट इन द रीजन पोज्ड मेनी प्रॉब्लम्स एज वेल, और प्रॉफिट ने उस वक्त पर डोनेशंस मांगी, क्योंकि इस दौरान कहर आ गया था. कहर क्या होता है? पानी और खाने की कमी हो जाना. The rich Muslims contributed generously toward the cause. Hazrat Abu Bakr, Hazrat Usman, Hazrat Umar, Saad bin Ubaida, Talha, Zubair, ये सारे इसी में आते हैं जिन्होंने बहुत generously किया था. और हमने जब companions पढ़ा था in the first Islamic community, वहां पे भी आपने देखा था that how they all actually generously contributed to Tabuk expedition. Hazrat Usman gave 900 camels and 100 horses along with large sums of money. Hazrat Abu Bakr gave away his entire wealth. Hazrat Umar gave away half of his wealth. Talha, Saad bin Ubaidah, and Muslima also donated generously. फिर ये सारे donations और इस help की मदद से 30,000 Muslims arrived at Tabuk, and the rumors proved to be false on their arrival कि जिसने ये बात फैलाई थी कि हेराक्लियस जो बाइजेंटाइन के वो मुस्लिम्स के अगेंस्ट कैंपेन करने वाला है, ये तो बात झूठ निकली. The Byzantines were so afraid that they did not even stand up against the Muslims, and the expedition gained a lot of support and confidence for Muslims. That's where the Prophet's life in Medina was about to come to an end, where came the farewell pilgrimage and Hijjatul Wada sermon. In 632, the Prophet decided to lead the Hajj. Pilgrims gathered from all over, and it was his last Hajj. Everyone was eager to accompany the Prophet, and 144,000 pilgrims collected for this Hajj. The Prophet's ways established the way of Hajj forever, और आज तक हम वही तरीका follow करते हैं according to the Sunnah as well. On the day of Arafat afternoon, the Prophet delivered the final sermon, जिसके main points ये थे: listen attentively and pass on the message to those who are absent. Life and property of Muslims are sacred. Muslims are accountable for their deeds in this life and the day of judgment. Interest is prohibited, जिसको हम सूद कहते हैं. All enmity from before Islam is no more. Satan leads astray with small things. Women have rights and they must be acknowledged. अभी हम एक टॉपिक भी पढ़ेंगे जो पेपर 2 और बुक में नहीं है आपकी. उस चैप्टर का नाम क्या है? राइट्स ऑफ वुमेन, जो कि कहीं पे आपको नहीं मिलेगा, हमने पढ़ना ही है. The pillars of Islam must be observed. All of the mankind is one family. Superiority over one another is only the basis of piety. All Muslims are brother. He is the last prophet and no prophet was to come after him. Pass on the message of Islam and the religion has been perfected and completed. और इसका एक बहुत खूबसूरत reference है that this day I have perfected for you your religion and completed my favor upon you, and choose Islam for you as your religion. And at the end of the sermon, the Prophet asked, O people, have I faithfully delivered unto you my message? और सारे हाजियों ने कहा था, yes. The Prophet raised his right hand and said, O Allah, bear witness that I have conveyed your message to your people. Then the Prophet passed away. The Prophet spoke about paradise continually after returning to Medina. उनके ख्वाब में भी आता है कि, और बहुत से लोग कहते हैं, when death is approaching, you get these signs, you get these dreams about paradise and life after death as well. He visited Jannatul Baqi and prayed for his forgiveness. The Prophet fell ill soon afterwards and he was given the choice by Allah to live longer or return to Allah. The Prophet chose to return, and the Prophet moved to Hazrat Aisha's house for his last days. Abu Bakr was appointed to lead the prayer in his place, and he prayed behind Abu Bakr on his last day. He passed away in Hazrat Aisha's house, and that came the end of the life in Medina for Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam.